Ask the Podcast Coach for October 9th, 2021.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music that means, hey, it's Saturday morning. I went Harry Carey there for a minute. Hey, it's Saturday morning, everyone. Welcome to Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live by me. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com. And joining me in about 20 minutes will be the one and only Jim Cullison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim is had some things going on this morning. He's like, I'll be there around 11 Eastern. So if you're wondering, hey, where's that guy, the Jim guy? He will be here shortly. You can jump in if you'd like. We are here at askthepodcastcoach.com/live. Feel free to tweet that out, and if you have a question, you can ask it there in the chat room. You can also go to askthepodcastcoach.com/join, and that will jump you right here into the video. But before we do that, we need to, of course, have the coffee pour, even though there's nobody here drinking coffee. I do have some McDonald's Coke. We could do that, I guess. And that coffee pour, this one, there we go, is brought to you by our good friend Mark over at podcastbranding.co. If you need a logo, if you need artwork, if you need a website, if you need a PDF, if you need anything to look good, like the School of Podcasting logo right behind me, or the Ask the Podcast Coach logo down there, go over to podcastbranding.co and talk to my buddy Mark. If you didn't hear last week's episode, man, we got a lot of good feedback on that. Mark came on and just answered a bunch of questions. He's a podcaster, which is great. He's an award-winning graphic artist, and he can definitely make you look professional. Remember, they see you before they hear you. And I was talking with somebody, and I'm in the process of using Teachable to redo my School of Podcasting. And I was trying to pick some different colors. And one of the cool things you can have Mark do is come up with a color palette so that no matter where you're at, everything is going to look good. So whatever you need to make yourself look great, go over to podcastbranding.co and tell Mark that Jim and Dave sent you. Can I sip through the straw? And also, sponsoring Jim's mug that's not here is our buddy Dan over at Based on a True Story podcast. If you've ever watched a movie and you're like, hey, it says based on a true story, but that has an alien in it. You're like, wait, hold on a second. Then by all means, go over and check out Based on a True Story podcast. You can see right there on the front page. He's got the Titanic. He's got things here on the Pacific, Defiance, all sorts of fun stuff here. J. Edgar Hoover. Such an interesting dude. So, and if you need some manscaping, apparently at the bottom, he can help you with that on his website. So, thanks for joining me. Like I said, if you're just tuning in, you're like, hey, where is Jim? By all means, he will be here in about 20 minutes. So that's what's going on. And I was sitting here thinking, well, what happens? Here we go. Have I used the Zoom H1N with the advanced features? I have not. I have a Zoom H1. It's about the size of a Snickers. And I have not even looked at the H1N because to me, nothing is going to top the Zoom PodTrack P4 for a little over $200. I can't really see anything going, yeah, that one's 80. And I'm like, yeah, but this one will almost do your laundry. So that's what's going on. So keep that in mind. Is that Hoover the inventor of the vacuum cleaner? No, it is not. That was J. Edgar Hoover was, I believe, the head of the CIA or the FBI. He was a naughty man, basically. And so what we're going to do while we wait for Jim, let me get this off the screen because everybody's like, why are we looking at that website? Because that's what we're going to do. I just realized if I take me off the screen, then I fill up the whole screen. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go over here and we're going to do what I'm now calling the Ask the Podcast Coach hot seat. And if you have a website or something you want me to look at, I'll be more than happy to do that since we have no questions in the chat room. Was the FBI chief? I knew Fred would know for nearly 50 years. Yeah. And so this guy asked on Facebook today, he said, hey, I have been, doing this podcast. I think he said he's up to about 14 episodes and he's just not, no, that was 14 downloads was the most downloads he's had per episode. And I forget exactly how many downloads or how many episodes he said he had. And since he asked for feedback, I don't feel bad going, hey, there's a lot of low hanging fruit. And this is the problem. This is where I think, again, I don't know why. Well, I know why. It's hard to spend hours on something and go, here, sir, will you please beat the snot out of this? Nobody seems to like that. And in the chat room, Gary's bringing up Elvis Costello, which is going to make me want to sing What's So Funny? What's so funny about peace, love, and I don't want to sing on the show, but let's get back to this website. And it's learngrowgive.com. So right there, I'm not entirely sure what I know it's about probably improvement and things like that, but learn, grow, give. So I came over to podcast and clicked on it because let's think about this for a second. What do you want people to go? What do you want them to do when you go to their website? So first things first, when you go there, hopefully within 10 seconds, if not 5, you want them to know what your website is about. And so that's one thing. Then you want them to hopefully either contact you, listen to your podcast, or subscribe to the podcast. Now, granted, if this is for a business, you want them to buy something or sign up for a newsletter, things like that. But podcasting wise, you want them to either listen easily, subscribe or follow, take your verb on that, and then maybe contact you to say, hey, that episode was really, really good. So when I come over to podcasts on his website, first of all, notice he says here, the Learn, Grow, Give podcast library. Thanks for stopping by, blah, blah, blah. So can I listen here on this page? Not without scrolling down. Here's a fun one. Finding happiness and fulfillment. That's the featured episode. And yet there's no links here to his featured episode. And so I go, when I look at this, first of all, I'll ask the chat room here, what's the one thing that makes people click? Anybody? What's the one thing that makes people click? It's really, really important to your show. I'll give you some time. I realize there's probably a 7-second delay on this. What makes people click on your show? When I'm looking at a page like this, what's going to make me click? Because what I'm looking at for the people listening on the audio right now is he has 10 players in front of me. That's it. Gary, tell him what he's won. Gary wins. It's a cheese straightener, Gary. Congratulations. Yeah, so he's got 10 players in front of me, of which the one title is How to the other one is Can the Past Div? Another one is It's Not What Another one is It's Not What maybe part 2 of that. Put Instant Grat, The Desire to the Blunt, you get the idea. Episode titles are huge, and we can't see any of them. And if I click on these, can I subscribe? Oh, I get show notes that I can read in a 1-inch box. That's convenient. So, now do these play? Sure, these play. But the title, I don't know where I'm going. So I would take these 10 episodes and make a blog post for each one and put that player there with subscribe buttons. I will say this till I die. It's all about subscribers and followers. Take your pick. So when we scroll down here, maybe I'm thinking there's more. Now I go down here. Now I'm kind of confused because I'm like, what is this, a blog post? Is it it's on the podcast title. So I'm thinking this must be the podcast. So it says, why do we need heroes? Okay. 7 best practices for an effective virtual learning environment. Let's do that one. It's got a number in it so that, it must be good. So I click on this, and I've never seen this, by the way. We're doing this live. Okay. Nice graphic at the top. any way to subscribe or play. That's what I'm looking for here. I want to subscribe or I want to play. And I scroll down and he's got decent show notes here. He's got some Google food, distance learning best practices, no player. Really confused why there's no player on a thing that I just clicked on that is a podcast. So this is a blog post, and I've seen people do this, and I do not know why. They will have their show notes in one area and the player in the other. No, because what you want to do is put your player here so that if somebody's listening on their website and they click play, they will stay there. Now, what happens in that case with Google is Google goes, I noticed that every time we put this particular website up, and people go to it, they stay there for a while. That must be really good content. And so, yeah, whatever it is, there's no player. Again, we want people to click play. We want them to follow. And I can't do either here. So I started off confused coming to this page because there were just a bunch of players, but I don't see anywhere on here how to subscribe to this show. So that's my big thing for whoever this guy was on Facebook. I would be number one under podcast, make another sub menu that says subscribe/follow. And no, see, I will never understand this. A Pod Love subscribe button. Just put the buttons on. Go to subscribe and follow. That's Daniel's plugin if you're using WordPress. I do not understand sending people to another website where they can subscribe when you can just put the subscribe buttons on your website and send people to your website. And those links boost your Google juice, not Podlove's website, not Linktree's website. It boosts your website. I do not understand that. That is a pet peeve of mine when people make link stuff on another platform. I know it's easy. It's really not that hard on your website. So that would be, let's go to the About page just for fun. Because if you don't know this, the About page is probably the second highest page that will bring people to this. So this is where we have to figure out, is this a podcast with a business or a business with a podcast? And so driving passion, achieving goals, and changing lives. I'm not sure what I'm looking at. Is this about what? So this particular, I'm not sharing my screen. No, I am sharing my screen. So if we look at this, does this help a little bit? Maybe, not so much. It's about him, but I would have made that the top thing here, like about so-and-so, because this is all about him. And there's nothing here about the podcast. And I would be tempted to put about the podcast. The Learn, Grow, Give podcast is about such and such and such and such, where we blah, blah, blah. The Pod Love thingy is on my, I know what you're talking about. You're talking about, okay. Yes, I know what you're saying. But that's also, I don't send people to what they're saying in the chat room. Stefan is saying, hey, I'm using the Pod Love thing. I am, but I don't tell people to go to podlove.com/whatever. I will tell them to go to maybe schoolofpodcasting.com/follow. It's still my brand. I shouldn't say I never promote other brands because for the record, I'm horrible at making other websites that aren't mine. Like I have podcastingresources.com. Why isn't that schoolofpodcasting.com/resources? Because there are times when I do stupid stuff. But if I could go back in time, I would, but that website now has Google traffic. So I leave it there. So that would be what I would do here on this particular website. So that would be my advice for somebody who's just starting out. And I think, to me, again, these look okay. For me would be, this is where I think, and it doesn't have to be me, but get somebody who you are not related to, who is, not your best friend that you grew up with or whatever, to get some feedback. Because when I saw that, I was like, ooh, this seems to be a person who is way too close to the trees to kind of get a objective view of your own stuff. It's hard to do. It really is. So the other thing I wanted to ask somebody to test for me, if you're on Facebook, see if you can copy something from Facebook and paste it into something else, because that's what I do every Saturday morning. I use Trello just because why not, to keep all my ideas about what we might talk about on the show. And I go to Facebook and I get questions and I copy them and I paste them into Trello. And this morning, Facebook would not let me copy anything from Facebook. Now, if you missed the week, Facebook had a fun week. They were down for 6 hours, which is why I will be moving to circle.so in the future. And I don't have to worry. I heard another last night. I was on the Podcasters Roundtable. Ray Ortega, not a big fan of Facebook. Everybody I run into is like, not a big fan of Facebook. And if you watched the whistleblower on 60 Minutes, there was a woman from Facebook that worked there, smuggled thousands of documents out. And basically, she said that Facebook likes to stir the pot. Now, this is not a revelation of anybody. Facebook likes to get, because it turns out people will be drawn to, like moth to a flame, things that make them mad because you want to go, which is when you think about it. I made a post this week because people were glad came out after Dave Chappelle saying he was homophobic. And if you watch the last 10 minutes of Dave Chappelle's latest special on Netflix, I highly recommend it, by the way. The last 10 minutes were amazing. Like, holy shnikes, amazing. And he kind of said, I'm going to get attacked for this. And he did. And I just thought it was funny that he's like, watch, this is what's going to happen. And that's why he also kind of said he thinks that's going to be his last special for a while. Because he was like, I'm going to put this out there and watch them attack me. And they did. And yeah, Gary says Facebook likes to make money by stirring the pot. And they do. And that's basically what this whistleblower said. And so I keep telling people, find somebody you don't agree with and have a conversation, because my guess is you're probably missing some information here. So I went out to Facebook, and what I ended up having to do was take a screenshot of a question so I could read it here. But this kind of ties into getting attacked in Facebook and things like that. And this is from Valeska. And she said, I made a post earlier. We talked about it, I think it was last week, saying that the only thing I didn't like about podcasting is that we can't reply or delete inaccurate, that's interesting, or hateful reviews. And thanks to a couple of people here, I found out I can dispute it. I did and had a reply within hours. I understand that haters are part of the process, but the more we let people get away with doing things that are wrong, there's a fun word, without even trying to do anything about it, the more permission we give them to just about do whatever they want, to let them just lie about whatever they want. I feel it's not just important for yourself, but your potential future listeners if you do get hateful, incorrect things removed about you, because those reviews can and will affect at least some people deciding not to listen because you have a bad review. I don't know. If somebody tells me that this show is good, I will go listen to it. And I don't care if there's 15 million bad reviews there. That my friend said it was good. I trust them. I don't trust any reviews. There was a thing on Amazon that Bandrew Scott was talking about. A bunch of companies got kicked off because what would happen is they would have you buy things on Amazon. So you're a verified buyer. They would then give you a refund via PayPal. So you got the product for free and then say, now write me a 5-star review. So just the thing that really, if I were to put on my old man hat, I'm glad I'm on the back nine, kids, is because the one thing that's going away that we can't find anymore is the truth. We don't know what the truth is. And if you don't know what the truth is, well, I guess we're all screwed. And that's really about it. I'm really looking at this going, man, like, it used to be like, here, look, we did this test and they just, anyway, let me see. I read somewhere you can get reviews on Apple's removed. Apparently that you can contest them. But the thing I thought was interesting is she said lie, because people lie about, well, if I say, hey, that I don't like your show, because I'll give you an example. I somehow ended up listening to Sylvester Stallone's daughter's podcast. Now they're 20 23 to 28 ish. They had Sly on, and he came on and went for about 45 minutes. The first 5 minutes were horrendous. And I mean, like, why is this here when like Sly's like, I don't know how to use the microphone? I was like, that could have been edited out, you know? And so I could say, I don't like that show because I like that episode because I like Sly and he's pretty entertaining. But the other ones, like there was one like What Our Perfect Guy Is. Now I could say I don't like that show, and they could very easily, and they would be right, say, hey, guess what, old middle-aged white guy, you're not my target audience. But if I say I don't like your show, I'm not lying. So that's the part I thought was interesting. And also she used the word wrong. And that's the other thing. Wrong is that's a judgment call. Now there are some things we kind of all agree on that, like, I don't know, if you shoot that guy for no reason, that's kind of wrong. You know, I think we all agree on that one. But other things like audio quality, that's subjective. You know, there's some people that think when your mic is 10 miles away from you and you sound like this, that's perfectly fine. But I tend to think that's wrong. And Scott Johnson has a great point here. He says, look at any major podcaster. They all have hundreds or thousands of one-star reviews. Think it affects their process or their income? No, it doesn't. I get that there is a I don't know what the percentage is, but there is a percentage of people that go to Apple and maybe they've typed in a subject. Maybe they're looking for bodyboarding. Is that a sport? Sounds like it should be. Bodyboarding. And they type in bodyboarding, and there are 4 podcasts there. One has 100 reviews, one has 6, one has 30, and one has 50. Well, the first thing I'm going to look at is not the reviews. You guessed it. I'm going to look at the artwork. You know, I'm going to look at how many episodes they are. And then I'm going to click on them and see, are they still producing? And then I'm going to click play. And if it starts off and it sounds like this, I'm not listening to that. So I click on the next one. And if they come across, they're like, welcome in a world where people are bodyboarding. Yeah, sure. That would be fine. But, Uncle Marv says podcasts should try to be like TV. If you don't like the show, change the channel. Yeah, that was my whole thing when they were picking on Dave Chappelle. I'm like, if you don't like him, there's an easy way. I walked into my local Walmart here. We have one of those ginormous ones. It's got groceries, the whole 9 yards. And they redid the whole thing. They're still doing it, which I think this is illegal. I was in there 2 nights ago. There's no public restrooms. And I'm like, isn't that illegal? But they removed at least 15 registers and put in self-checkouts. And I was like, I hate that. I hate that because there are a lot of times I go to Walmart for groceries. Their groceries are ridiculously cheap. And I will have a big old thing. And I'm like, I don't want to check myself out. Not to mention the fact that part of the price of my Raisin Bran is paying for somebody to ring me out. But on the other hand, so if I really don't like that, what should I do? I should vote with my wallet and go to Target or I don't know, Giant Eagle or any of the other grocery stores around here. We should vote with our wallet. And we don't. We do. We vote with our wallet. We're like, well, that's cheap. I guess I'll go check myself out. So yeah. So if you don't like something, don't watch it and it will go away in theory is the way that works. So I thought that was an interesting point. The fact that she's like, it's wrong and she's going to fight them and, by all means, but again, we kind of said this last week. If you got into podcasting or God bless you, if you got into YouTube, you're going to get negative reviews. And what's, I still think odd, but it's just human nature. We could get 80 positive reviews and 1 negative one, and we can recite the negative one like it's scripture and completely ignore the 80 positive ones. So if you are watching on Clubhouse, you can raise your hand and I'll bring you up on stage. If you're watching live at askthepodcastcoach.com/live, feel free to chip in with a question there via chat. Or if you want to jump in and join me here, just go to askthepodcastcoach.com/join. And I thought this was an interesting one. I also wanted to read. This was from Patrick. And I almost think he's making a joke. But he said, Pat, I've been thinking of making a comedy podcast / reformatting my current talk podcast to a more comedy oriented podcast. Now, call me crazy. If you're going to call it a comedy podcast, I tend to expect that when I hit play, somewhere in the first 5 to 10 minutes, I should at least chuckle. Call me weird. It's a comedy podcast. And I realize there are a lot of comedians that classify their interview show as comedy, and yet none of them make me laugh. Conan tries really hard to be weird with his sidekicks that I just fast forward. But so he says, but I'm not sure if I need to make jokes. Well, I'm thinking if you want to make people laugh, I would think, call me crazy, that you'd want to make some jokes or say something witty. Yeah, I'm thinking again, if the goal is to be a comedy show, saying funny things would be on the I think that's on the I think it's on the docket. I think that's on the buffet. I think you should do that. My question is there being, if I make a comedy podcast, how can I be funny? And if you're asking how can I be funny, and he says serious answers please only. So that one made me scratch my head, because if you're not sure if you're funny, I guess you could try it on a podcast and see if people go, hey, you're really funny. Or you could read books. There are books on how to be funny. I read about half of one and was like, nah. But I just thought that was interesting. It's like, hey, I want to make a comedy podcast, and yet, um, should I be funny in it? So it's kind of interesting. Stefan says sometimes the downvotes are from people which have much time on their hands, nothing better to do, or in some cases, your competition. Yes, that is true. Funny, like Good Morning Vietnam. Well, that's true, but he was kind of telling jokes. It's hot. It's hot like crotch pot cooking. I mean, that's kind of a joke. It's a funny thing. Gary says you're either funny or you're not. Also, Scott Johnson mentioned Steve Martin's masterclass, which actually was I watched that because I'm a huge Steve Martin fan, and he did make some good points in there, but it wasn't so much how to write a punchline or things like that. So we have a question here from Felix. Can a show have multiple formats? I'm thinking of doing short 10-minute shows throughout the week and a single interview once a bye week. Does it work? It can. The key is yes, basically. Jordan Harbinger, but his isn't so much a difference. He does long interviews, and on Friday, it's still a long episode. He answers questions, but you can. The bottom line is, does it deliver value? Now, when it's drastically different, where somebody is 10 minutes one week and then the next show is 45, some people, I have a playlist called short shows, and they're all like 5 to 10 minutes. And I love those because it takes me 7 minutes to walk around the block. So I can go to my short show list, listen to an episode, walk around the block, and be good. So the problem is, what happens then when your long interview comes out and I'm one way around the block and I'm like 25% through your episode? Not the end of the world, but I know some people like that. So, ask your audience. Some people will put it in once or twice, and give it a shot and see what's going on. But I don't know. I don't know. What do you guys think in the chat room? Or I know somebody who might have an opinion on it. We'll bring this guy in. You know him, you love him. Oh, we're not on the hot seat anymore. I forgot about that. Here, let me get you off the hot seat, Jim. I don't want you to get burned.
Nice.
But
should I say greetings and happy Saturday morning to you?
Yes. The question is, can you have, let me find the question. I just had it. He was asking, here we go, Felix. Can a show have multiple formats? I'm thinking of doing a short 10-minute show throughout the week and a single interview once a week or bi-weekly. And I was just saying, well, some people have certain activities that they do with, like I walk around the block, so I have short shows for that. I don't think it's the end of the world if you do it. I'm just thinking some people might go, so.
Yeah. I think if your audience will listen to it, then yes, right? I mean, Cigar Authority does a 2-hour show and then a 30-minute one that they alternate back and forth on. And I think they've debated about, does it get its own channel? In fact, they asked me, and I thought, it should probably have its own channel. That way you can subscribe if you like the 2-hour show. You can subscribe to it. If you want the 30-minute show, you can subscribe to that. But at the end of the day, if your listeners download it and listen to it? Is there a difference? Right?
Yeah.
You know?
And I really, Stefan in the chat room says, if it fits the interest of your listeners, like
Yeah.
you may have like car things, and then okay, on Friday we're going to talk cheese. It's like that may not work.
There's a podcast called One Nation Under Whiskey, and they do a 2-hour. Isn't it great? Isn't that a great? That's a great title for it. They do a 2-hour and then a 30-minute as well. That 30-minute goes 45 most of the time. They try.
Right.
They say a tight 30 minutes. They don't ever really do it. But again, that they mix them up and they're different. I mean, they're both about whiskey, but they're different kind of formats. They do it in the same feed. I listen to both. In fact, sometimes I choose based on what I'm doing, what I listen to. And I like that. Like, oh, no, I don't have time for the 2-hour show. So I'll just listen to the shorter shows. So sometimes that gives me more choice without having to have another podcast feed, I guess is the way that'll work.
Yeah. The other thing, you could try it and then look at the downloads
Yeah.
and see if one is getting considerably more or less. But
Put out a survey, right?
Yeah, that's it.
So.
Jim, are you thirsty at all?
I am, and actually, so we'll just fake the pour because I put the coffee in. But
yes,
did you do the?
We did.
Okay.
We've done it all.
Well, let me just say, let
Yeah.
me say my part. Big thanks to Dan Lefebvre over there, based on a true story podcast.com. Dan, I'm already a couple cups of coffee in this morning because I had a meeting first thing this morning, which is why I'm late. But always appreciate his sponsorship of the show. If you're looking for a new podcast to listen to, where you want to get kind of figure out what's based on a true story or not, he's got some great podcasts out there based on a true story podcast.com. Dan, thanks for your sponsorship.
There we go. And speaking of short shows, if you're looking for a short show about dogs, then you got to check out the Dog Podcast Network. If you need a long show about dogs, guess what? Dog Podcast Network. If your dog has cancer, guess what? Dog Podcast Network. It's all there. If you like podcasts about dogs, dogpodcastnetwork.com. We always thank our awesome supporters who donate $20 a month. And that is people like Michael Delaney over at Baby Mountain Radio Productions, where podcasting and hard work are made fun. Check him out at babymountainradio.com. Shane at the Tourpreneur. If you operate a tour business or plan on starting one, that podcast, tourpreneur.com, is for you. Glenn the Geek Hebert over at horseradionetwork.com. If you have a horsey, you got to check out horseradionetwork.com. The Indie Drop-In Network. If you have a true crime, a comedy, or a scary story, which comes in really handy around this time of year in October, then check out the indiedropin.com network. You can give Greg, the guy that's running that over there, a couple episodes, and he will put that in front of his audience. Ed Sullivan over at soniccupcake.com. If you need an editor, Ed can definitely connect you and get you sounding great. Felix over at the Latin Podcast Awards, which is dedicated to enhancing the visibility of the Latinx podcast around the world since 2017. Check them out at latinpodcastawards.com. Max Trescott at aviationnewstalk.com. So if you're a pilot or interested in aviation, check him out. And then the KJST Media. It's an LGBTQ plus founded company focused on helping all levels of podcasters to grow their podcast, regardless of what you're looking for. Caden is there to help you. Check it out, kjstmedia.com. Greg over at debtshepherd.com, where he is teaching financial wellness. Check him out again, debtshepherd.com. Kim over at Toastmasters101.net. If you need to develop your voice, improve your content, or reduce your editing time, check it out, Toastmasters101.net. And if you'd like to be an awesome supporter, because I know you were going to do that last week and you're like, oh, I should do that. Go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome, or you can go to askthepodcastcoach.com/store and do other things like one-time donations. You can buy my book and all sorts of other fun stuff. It's all there at askthepodcastcoach.com/store. So yes, I did something new since you weren't here. We some guy in Facebook asked me, he was like, hey, like I'm only getting like 14 downloads. What's the deal? And so we looked at his website and there were some things, that he could do. So the other thing, Jim, you can be my tester. If you go to Facebook, can you copy anything from Facebook into another program? Because that's normally how I do it. And it's kind of weird because this morning I could not I couldn't.
So you're just saying like grabbing
Anything from a
anything
Facebook
from
group
anywhere?
and just copy it and then go to paste it. And
Alright,
it was
let's
really weird because I went to like just my website, grabbed something. I thought maybe there was something funky in my computer memory or something like that. And it was just like, nope.
just
When it-
like text from anywhere?
yes. And like
And
it was a Facebook group. I don't know if that matters.
yeah, no, it's working for me.
That's really weird.
Yeah.
Okay. Gremlins. Because that was me. I was like, it's got to be something weird. And I just rebooted my computer. That was the other thing. I was like, well, I would reboot, except, well, I just did that. So anyway.
I did hear you talking about haters, bad
Yeah.
comments. As I was driving back from the meeting I had this morning,
Mhm.
or breakfast, I should say. It was a breakfast meeting. And I got this last week, I got a 1-word review, or not review, but it was a comment on YouTube. I go and check those every couple days for our Gallup stuff, and it just said worthless. Just one
Wow.
word, worthless. Now it's a video. It's a video that gets pretty good love from the community, and some people are just looking to pick a fight. Some people are just angry. Some people have low self-esteem. Whatever it takes. But it's just like, well, okay, it was worthless to you. You had been saying, truth is a interesting word in this. When people are saying, well, yeah, that's not true. Well, to that person, whoever it was truth. It was worthless to them. So, okay, it's worthless to you. I'm sorry you wasted your time. But I do know there are others who are getting great value out of it because there's a bunch of other comments saying so. So I think sometimes to the person who was piping in on this, sometimes you just have to have some thick skin and let the 1 stars go.
That's it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let them go.
Yeah.
And they're not as bad as you think they are for these people coming in and listening. You always feel like, oh, I'm going to have to close the doors. They're not, no, just let it ride. Let it ride. It'll be fine. Don't fight it.
And we've now realized what Jim's superpower is.
What?
When you show up, the chat room starts asking questions. I was like, anybody got a question? Anybody? Really? Okay, well, let's look at this guy's website. Thoughts on having your podcast on YouTube with no video, just a screenshot of the show. Does that realistically expand subscribers? My thought on that is I'm not putting that on what I would call a real YouTube channel. I have one that I created a special YouTube channel just for what I will call fake video. And I think my largest number of views on that was 8. And I think the most anybody watched was 60%. So, but to me, it's like, it's free.
Doesn't hurt.
Cost. Yeah, it doesn't hurt. Why not? But I would not put those kind of videos, he said in quotation marks, in a channel I was trying to grow. I would make it its own thing. So, and then Stephen wants to know, what do we think about the new dynamic microphone M70 Pro X by Beyerdynamic? To which I go, huh? How much is it? Is it I guess it's a dynamic. I don't know. I'm kind of, unless it's really cheap and really good, I'm pretty good with the Samson Q2U or the ATR 2100. I'm kind of like, unless there's something that made it really better than one of those two, those are the two that you got to jump off. And I usually recommend the Samson Q2U just because it's easier to get in Europe. So it's like media hosts. I used to make a podcast for every media host, and then all of a sudden there were 50 of them. And I went, well, that's not going to work anymore. So I'm kind of like, look, it's either Libsyn or, Buzzsprout or Captivate, or, I've got all those, but I did an episode on that. I'm like, hey, the bottom line is it doesn't matter. I've never heard of Beyerdynamic. Is that who makes this stuff? Let me see here. No. How much is it, Jim? Does it say?
Let's look. I thought there was
Probably not.
Got good pictures of it. Yeah, $299.
See, if I'm paying $300, you've got to beat this one, the Electro Royce RE320. Perfect. And I've never heard of Beyerdynamic. There's probably somebody going, what? You've never heard of Beyerdynamic? It's probably this great. Maybe it's somebody who came down in price. Normally they make super duper expensive microphones. I don't know. If you feel like sending me one, I'll be happy to play with it. I did finally get a hold of somebody at Shure After they come,
shock mount and pop filter included in that
Ah.
price. Yeah.
well, see, I've heard that before when they go shock mount included with like the Rode podcast mic, and I'm like, you can make that thing pop pretty easy. At least they're giving you a shock mount, which is kind of cool. But you know, and again, to me, microphones, Bandrew Scott on the Podcastage YouTube channel just reviewed the Shure MVX. So it's, you know how they came out with the MV7, which was USB and XLR. Well, they got rid of the USB. So now you have like Shure SM7B, which is $400, I think.
Okay.
And now this one's like $250. And it's kind of like SM7B light. And so what Bandrew did, and he does this because it's like, hey, let's go back to, you know, the MVX mic. Okay, now here's the Samson Q2U. Okay, let's go back to the MVX. Now here's an ATR 2100. And just, he went back and forth. And he always goes back to the mic to kind of cleanse your palate, I guess, in a way. And after about 5 or 6 microphones, I'm like, I don't hear any difference. I mean, if one's a little more bassier, I can go into, you know, Audacity or Audition or Hindenburg and make it bassier there. It's really, I just, as I was watching, I'm like, do people not get that it's not the tech? It's the tech that makes you feel comfortable. If you find a microphone and you go, ooh, I like the way I sound on this, that's the microphone for you. Because other than that, it's really, for me at least, I don't know that I listen to a podcast. The one that will kill me, if you have like a where you need a de-esser, your S's kind of make me like blink because they're super shrill or something like that. Other than that, or if it's just, you know, recorded in a fishbowl or just whatever, it's pretty hard to make bad sounding audio. People still find a way to do it, but for me, I just don't think it's, I don't want to say it's not important, because it is, because then somebody will go buy a $10 microphone and go, what do you mean? You said it wasn't important. I'm like, nah.
Here's an interesting screenshot. Let me reshare my screen again. Throw that up there. Look, so look at the there's 4 pictures here. Look at the lady 3 in from the left. She's talking into it pointed directly from the top. And then there's someone singing, or I'm assuming they're singing, and they're singing into it from the side. And so, you know, I typically, like, a microphone has a direction. Maybe this is omnidirectional and some of those other things, but it's just interesting. I guess both, not all microphones are built that way. So that may be one of these where maybe it's okay from both directly on the side and directly on the top. Generally not, but
no,
I'm not an engineer either. I'm not a sound engineer. So maybe that's okay. Maybe it's built to go that way. It just was one of those, like, that's interesting.
I've just never heard of Beyerdynamic. So maybe I'll go ask Andrew. If you go to podcastage.com, he's probably already reviewed it. That guy
probably has.
He really just, that's all he does.
But it probably lives in that same space. Thanks for doing that. Probably lives in that same space as the Heil and the RE, and in that $300 to $600 range. I bet the average person's going to have a hard time telling the difference if you just stayed in that range. Now, you know, Chris Curran, some of those guys, they're going to be able to tell the difference, right? You know, I think, you know, Chris could probably tell the difference between 3 or 4 megahertz or whatever that is in the, you know, the sound spectrum, you know. But I think for a lot of people, it just kind of depend. What do you want? Do you think there's any for video podcasts like this? Do you think there's any lift for the look? Like, you know, I've got this, you've got that, yours is bigger than mine. Is that a problem?
That's kind of what this new Shure MVX microphone, everybody's like, hey, like Bandrew said, it's a good mic. He goes, but literally you could get a Shure SM58 and it would sound just as good. He goes, but this one looks better because it's got that Joe Rogan kind of mic. So you could have it, you know, way down here and pointed at your chin, and it would probably still sound okay. It's just not $400. It's 250, probably, something like that. So
Dave, what's your top end for a mic, do you think, for you? Say where do you think you draw the line and say you're now not getting any more for the price. What do you think?
Boy, that's a great question. I would say probably somewhere between $200 and $300.
Okay.
Like when you go from like 50 to 100, you go, ooh, wow, that sounds different. When you go to 100 to 200, a little. But when you go above 200, like when I listen to a mic that's $200 and one that's 300, I'm like, you know what I mean? Okay, this one's got a little more bass to it.
So you have the 320, you have the RE320. The RE20 is a couple $100 more.
I think it's $100 more. I've almost bought it, and I've almost bought the Shure SM7B, and that's where I kind of go.
And would you buy? So if you're making a choice between a 20 and a 320, and you have the money,
I would go with the 20.
You go with the 20. Okay.
If I had the microphone, if I had the money, yeah. But the reason I have this one is because it's $100 cheaper, but it's almost for video again. If you're doing a show about radio and you show up with an RE320, anybody in radio is going to go, oh, that guy's serious, because that's in every radio station.
Yeah.
Where it's a very, very niche kind of thing. But I've listened to a SM7B every time I go to a show and I put headphones on and I talk. And of course, they've probably got it all juiced up, so it sounds great or whatever. But I always go, I need to walk away here because I feel my wallet catching on fire. But I don't think, if I got it side by side, I'm pretty sure I could take this microphone, make it sound like an SM7B. I would just turn up the bass, and I think an EQ, it's I think maybe the better stat that we should be looking at is rear rejection, and how the pattern is, how tight it is to picking up things just in front of you, and Ray was talking about it last night on the Podcasters Roundtable, the MVX, and they called it something like voice isolation, something like that. And he goes, it's the polar pattern. He goes, but it sounds like to non-geeky people, it's like, ooh, voice isolation built into it. It's like, it's a dynamic microphone. That's what voice isolation means. So, Kyle says you don't need anything above $400 for voice only podcasting. If you're a musician or doing Foley work, then the more expensive ones. Yeah. That's when you get into, the other one, condenser microphones, because they're going to pick up a little more lows. They're going to pick up a little more highs. So, Tom says I bought a RE20 for $400. Yeah. I think this is 3. The RE20 is 4. And I'm not sure what a SM7B is going for. I want to say close to 5. It's a lot, and then I always think it's funny because you buy an SM7B and you got to go buy a Fethead or a Cloud Lifter to use it because it's so gain hungry.
So it's another $100, right?
Yeah. So I was like, and that's where I always ask people when they go, should I get a different mic? I'm like, are people complaining about your audio? No. Well, then, do you like the mic? Yes. Then no, you don't need a new mic.
I think about it all the time. I have the ATR 2100. I've got a Q2U that sits in the bowl behind me, and I kind of think, I've been doing this a long time. I should probably have one of those fancy ones like you guys do. and then I think, no, why? I guess if this one broke and the Q2U broke, I guess I would be, okay, if I'm buying it, maybe I do upgrade to the $300 or $400 as opposed to the $100. But what if it's not broke, right? Why fix it? Type deal.
Yeah, I know. I've been looking at, and I always think it's kind of funny when people are like, well, like the RE320 is a big microphone. I've got it taking up half the screen, and I could do things to kind of get it out of the shot. But I'm like, yeah, but I'm a podcaster. Like, should my audience expect to see me in front of a microphone? You know what I mean? It's like,
right.
That's the part. I know. I've looked at the Rode Go microphones, the little wireless ones they have, and they seem to sound really good. And I've been watching a lot of videos on those, and they're really cool where you can have them record on the receiver, all sorts of cool stuff.
Wireless Go 2, I think, is what we're talking about.
Yeah. And they now have accessories. In fact, let me throw a link to these, where you can, it's a stick. It's basically just a stick. Cause I have the Rode Reporter microphone that is really just what I call the Bob Barker. I mean, it's really long, right? So I can do this and basically point it at people, and it's this without a microphone on the top, and you just snap the Go wireless into it, put a windscreen on it, and you've got the Bob Barker mic. And I was like, so they're kind of creating their own little ecosystem around the Rode Wireless Go, and I was like, it's one of those where you're like, okay, I need to quit watching this video because my wallet's getting hot.
I don't have that gear acquisition syndrome like others do. I don't. That's not it. Like I think about buying stuff. It took me, I bought this Motu after being out in Boston with Ed Sullivan.
See, that's it. You hang out with Ed, you spend money.
Oh, that's dangerous. It is dangerous to be with Ed. And but it took me a while to make that. It really took me a while. I make the decision fast and then I pull back just as quick. I'm like, yeah, I'm not really gonna, and so I don't struggle with it as much. It's one of those kinds of things. Then I end up going kind of cheap and I always regret it. I always like, why did I buy the cheapest thing? I should have spent a little bit more. So I just don't struggle with that as much.
I'm trying to get into that mindset because I really like the lights I have now. It's the third set I bought. And I wanted to buy these when I bought my first set, and then I bought those, and those were okay, and they looked better than the built-in lighting I had in my house. So I bought those, and then I bought a second set that looked a lot like these, but they weren't as expensive. And in the end, I got these, and again, those weren't bad either. I just liked the way I have the control over these. So I'm kind of trying to realize that maybe sometimes I just save my money, my pennies, and buy the thing I want and go that route. So
have you ever bought something real quick? You ever bought something that you just question and then you get it and you're like, oh, this was a great decision. Like, that every once in a while you have that too, or somebody gives you something and you're kind of thinking, I don't know. And then all of a sudden you're like, man, this is the best thing since sliced bread and peanut butter. So I always get caught in that too. I'm like, oh, maybe I'm going to miss out. Like this could be really good.
Yeah. My snowblower, I remember I bought it, and those things aren't cheap. And you're like, and then the first big snow, and you pull that cord and you're like, okay, yeah, this was,
this was a good decision.
Yeah. No buyer's remorse on this one.
Yes. Yeah. You usually get what you pay for though, right? I mean, I think most of the time you usually get what you pay for.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw somebody, I'm in an Anchor group, for Anchor users, and they were it's very hard because I usually just go in there to listen and watch. And they were kind of saying how, well, this doesn't do this and doesn't do, and I was like, no, I must stop myself from typing. You get what you pay for.
For sure.
So Kyle is talking about Zoom stuff. He says, I have an H1, an H2, an H4, and an H6. The H6 is now my go-to recorder. No mixer required anymore. Sorry, Mackie. Yeah, we all, I think, have done that. When I first started off, I had a Shure SM58, and then I bought two microphones. I bought one microphone because it was a quote vocal mic, which was an MXL something, and I bought it from a guy at Guitar Center. And then I heard I forget his name, Scott something. He invented the word pod fading. I remember that. But anyway, he had the total DJ voice and did voiceover. And I'm like, what mic do you have? And it was, I forget the even time, but it's still in my closet, because I wanted to sound like him. And then I was like, then I went back to my Shure SM58 because that was a condenser microphone. And at that point, I was next to a water heater, and that just, yeah. Oh, Daniel got kicked out of the Anchor.
Nice. What do you have to say Daniel, to get kicked out of a group?
Such a troublemaker. That's funny. Well, speaking of that, I do have a card here that says Anchor sucks. So I'm going to read this. Paul, someone creates a show the same name as yours, steals an episode from you, the literal recording, then calls that episode their own by slipping it into their show's feed. They also throw an ad on the episode to gain income. They repeat this process for other shows, and soon they have multiple sources of income from your content. This happened to me. I can't prove they have multiple shows, but it seems like that would be the path they'd take. They created a show with the same name as mine, stole my content, and put it in their episode. They didn't introduce my content or anything. They just made it their own. They threw an Anchor ad at the beginning. I imagine they have created multiple shows, all with Anchor ads in order to game the system. The good news is Anchor doesn't list them anymore, so that is kind of good. However, they still seem to have the RSS as active from what I can tell. I've contacted both Anchor and Apple to have it removed. And what's going to be really scary about this is Spotify is rolling out their ad marketplace for the top Anchor users. And that's when I was like, define that, please. And but if it's going to be easier to get ads on, because right now the only ad on Anchor is for Anchor. Hotpot actually wrote an article about that, and part of it is, if you don't know who you're advertising on, advertisers aren't real crazy about just put please associate my product with anybody. It doesn't matter, right? So that's going to be interesting to see.
What do you need to have, Dave? Like, okay, I get they stole your show,
right?
But you're not Joe Rogan. Like,
yeah.
Wouldn't that only really work is if your show is getting tens of thousands or 20s of thousands to make it even worth it? Like, Home Gadget Geeks does, let's just say it does 600 to 1,000, right? And I could, I'm going to make so little off of that. I make a little bit off of it. What if somebody was trying to put it in a different feed for people who didn't know me? Like, I guess I'm questioning how successful could that actually be, one.
Right.
And two, I think if you're doing your show right, and you're loading it full of contacts back to you, yeah, you're not getting the ad revenue for it. But man, if someone else is doing the legwork to get the advertising on the front of it, and you're doing your job right in the podcast to get recognition, like I'd listen. I would gladly, I'd let them have the ad revenue if they're going to promote my podcast.
Yeah,
right. I mean, like get over yourself in that case and kind of go, you're not Joe Rogan. You're not losing millions of dollars on this thing. You're losing $5s of dollars, maybe less. I don't know. Am I wrong?
No, I'm with you on that. Because if you think about, for that to work, the idea is let's say I'm going to lure Aaron Lenke, right? Really popular show. I'm going to take his RSS feed. I'm going to import it into Anchor. I'm going to, of course, Anchor will, if you want them, they'll submit it automatically for you to Apple. And now I read my Anchor ad at the beginning of it. So when people go, oh, my friend told me I should look for the Lore podcast, and they find yours instead of the real one. But like, I don't know that everybody's saying, oh, you need to go listen to Ask the Podcast Coach. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, great. You stole my show. But so it's going to work with the top shows, but
yeah. Again, if I had a show, I mean, and I just don't think, I don't know this guy that was saying this, if he's got a top show or not. Of course, if you have a top show, then don't you pay somebody to do it?
Yeah.
To do something about it. I've heard this from folks before where they're just like, well, they stole my show. And it's like, well, how many listeners do you actually have? And maybe it's a benefit to you. Like, if they're doing everything they can to promote your feed so that they get the ad revenue, they may be doing more promotion for you than you're doing for yourself.
Yeah. Well, and Kyle says if they steal your show name, go trademark it, file the paperwork, create a paper trail, and that'll take it down.
Yeah.
I don't think
it would. Don't put enough money in this to even care about it. Maybe that's my problem.
Well, and I don't think it would be hard to go, hey, do you hear that voice on that show? That's mine. Like, and take it down, would you?
Yeah. So, I just don't think people listen to podcasts that way. They listen to them because of the people who are on them, and they connect with those people. They don't connect with the RSS feed. Who cares where it is?
Yeah. It's going to be,
who cares?
Well, the other thing is, the last time I checked, Anchor was paying a penny a download. It was $10 for 1,000 downloads, so a penny. So I'm like,
yeah, how much could it be?
Yeah,
it's like they're making $7 a year off of your feed.
Yeah, so I'm not saying it's correct, and it's
no right.
But it's not legal, but it is one of those where it's like, but that's where they have the new spec that Adam Curry's working on, where they have a lock tag where you can basically almost like a domain name, where if somebody tries to import your feed
Right,
into
right,
Anchor and
right.
you have the lock tag on, in theory, if Anchor is recognizing that, in theory, they shouldn't then import the feed. So there's a lot of shoulds and maybe and kind of, but we'll see. But
I encourage everyone listening to Ask the Podcast Coach, steal Home Gadget Geeks. You can make as many feeds out of it, add all the advertising that you want to it. And if you promote home, because I promote so much stuff internally of things that we do in the community and
Yeah.
those kinds of things. And I say the average guy.tv studios and stuff. So anyways, if you want to take home Gadget Geeks, it's all yours.
Oh, well, speaking of Home Gadget Geeks, what is coming up on Home Gadget Geeks?
What do we do this week? Oh, so I've been doing a series where we have our Patreon supporters coming on. And so,
Nice.
so I had a guest on, talked a little bit about he made a bike trip from Denver to Minneapolis. No, it's probably not Milwaukee. There we go. It's that one. And so we talked about the tech and the gear that he used on this month-long bike trip across bicycle. He rode
Wow.
halfway or a third away across the United States. So that's go live a little bit later here on the Average Guy.tv.
My butt hurts just thinking about that. It's like, holy cow. That's a lot of riding. Yeah.
Soft seats. We also talked about these e-bikes that are real popular right now. Right. So if you're into that, it's out there right now. Well, it will be later.
There you go. Yeah. And on the School of Podcasting, I'll be talking about something about podcasting, of which I haven't figured out yet. It's in my Evernote, and I'll flip a coin and do one of it. Yeah. Excellent. So want to say thanks to the chat room for coming out. We're here every Saturday. AskThePodcastCoach.com/live. Thanks to Mark over at podcastbranding.co, Dan over at based on a true story podcast.com, and James at the dogpodcastnetwork.com. So stick around. We do have some post show, and Jim is going to do a big reveal in the show, in the post show. So that does not have anything to do with clothing, by the way, just in case you're wondering, but stick around. It's coming right up. And we're back. So, but yeah, if you want to talk about that, we can.
Yeah. Are you okay with it?
Oh, we're good. Yeah.
Okay. So, for the last couple of years, I've been struggling with an enlarged prostate. So men, it's a man problem. And we really couldn't figure out why. I've been working with my doctors and taking meds and stuff. So a couple of weeks ago, went in for PSA. By the way, gentlemen, your physicals are important. Like if you've been skipping because of COVID or whatever, or you're uncomfortable doing it. And I think most of the male listening audience, Dave, for us is you're right in the sweet spot, right? You're right in the zone with this, where, anywhere 35 or 40, you should just make sure they're doing a PSA test on you, right? Just make sure they're checking for those PSA levels. That's the prostate. So, finally, so my PSA levels have not been changing. And so my doctor ordered another MRI, and we did find, at least I had an MRI 2 weeks ago they did find cancer in the MRI, which is a little scary, right? So, so Tuesday of this week, I went to the doctor, or I went in and had a biopsy done. And he called me on Thursday and he goes, "Man, you must be the luckiest guy around. Like we couldn't find anything." And this biopsy had been an ultrasound and MRI enhanced. And so they were looking live at the pictures and going exactly where they had seen the spot during the MRI. I mean, it was crazy. It was crazy uncomfortable. Let's be really clear, guys. This is not the most comfortable thing in the world.
Yeah.
But no cancer. So it's both a scary moment and some you get. Now listen, I was ready for this. Like I've been telling people I was ready for it. Cancer must not have been ready for me. So I was, I kind of geared up mentally to get a cancer report back, and we were going to have to do some radiation treatments and some of those kinds of things. Prostate cancer is a very curable form of cancer. It's also very treatable. It is probably one of the easier ones. There's no cancer is easy, but it's probably one of the easier ones to treat. So I wasn't that worried about it, just to be honest. But it was one of those things. I told Dave a couple weeks ago when this came in. I said, "Hey, I don't know what this is going to mean for my Saturday mornings. I may have to go through some treatments, and we'll have to figure some things out." So he pinged me this week, and I just heard from the doctor. He's like, "What'd you hear?" And I'm like, "Well, apparently I'm the luckiest guy in the world right now because I have no cancer." So, anyways, appreciate. I just from a community standpoint. Nothing's going to change. I'll see him next Friday for some follow up and stuff. But I always appreciate the support of the community and some of those kinds of the what it means to me. It's those kinds of things happen to you, and you start kind of thinking about, okay, what does this mean for everything? What does this mean for everything that I do? What it means for me is, gentlemen,
Go get checked.
get your stuff checked. Like, and that doesn't, it's a super uncomfortable thing, and I get it, but make sure you're doing the right things. Get in and get those physicals. Get in and get that blood work done. Get in there. Make sure you're having good conversations with your doctor, and do it on a regular basis. You want to catch us early, Dave. I'd had an MRI 4 years ago, and I'd had biopsies 3 years ago that showed nothing. So I'm very, very I'm trying to be every couple years. I just want to make sure, like, if we catch it, we want to catch it early. And you can't catch it early if you're not looking for it.
That's it.
So, gentlemen, get out there and and ladies too. When we think about breast cancer and breast cancer awareness and some of those kinds of things, ladies, I know it's uncomfortable, but get it done. Get in there and get it checked.
Yeah. Well, JD Stutter wants us to know, has anyone have any thoughts on Listen Note rankings? When I saw them, my initial reaction was like, oh, great. More stats for podcasters to obsess over. When I looked at them, I don't quite get them, because it says like, it must be you're in the top ranking of Listen Notes or something, which is kind of like saying I'm a big fish in a very small pond. But I was not. I just was like, yeah, okay, because I know they talked about him on the feed, and that's when the first time I'd even heard about it. And I went looked, and I was like, eh. So Jim, have you ever looked at your Listen Note?
No,
Yeah.
no, I probably should, but I haven't.
But it's just one of those things where I was like, oh, yay, more things to, I don't know. It was, yeah, like I said, that's about as much as I've thought about it. Let's see what else here. Somebody asked on Facebook, Jerry, looking for some advice, but what's the best way to capture people's email so I can put them on a list about past and future shows? What I did, and it works okay. It's not a magic formula, but it works, is I went into Google Analytics, because I have Google Analytics on my website. I said, show me my top 10 posts. And then on those posts, I made some sort of lead magnet about that post. Like, hey, for more information about this subject, click here and get this PDF. And that brings in not a giant, wave of people, but every month I look in, I'm like, oh, look, my email list went up. So I don't know. Jim, do you do anything with
MailChimp, which they just got bought. So we'll have to see where
for like $8 gazillion billion trillion dollars. Holy cow.
We'll have to see where that goes as far as the service quality and some of those things. But just a MailChimp, and then I really worked actively trying to get folks to sign up for my mailing list, and then I did nothing with it. So, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there doesn't make a sound. So I've got this mailing list of a couple hundred people, and I rarely use it. Not that you shouldn't do this. It's just
Right.
I always think about once every other year. I'm like, darn it, I should really work that mailing list. And so for a couple months, I get it moving. I send out a weekly newsletter, hey, I'm going to start doing this. And then I do it for 2 or 3 months. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? I don't like writing newsletters. Like, that's not I got to figure out another thing to do. I'm meeting I did contact Mark after the show last week, and we set up a time. Mark has free 20-minute like consulting he'll do with you. If you go to his site and sign up, send him a note, he'll send you a link if you want to spend some time just chatting with him. But I'm going to get together with him, and that's some of the questions, Dave. Like, I don't want to do a monthly thing. I don't, that's just, I want to rethink, like continue to think, what am I best at? What do I like to do? And then just how do I do more of that?
I stole Paul Culligan's format, and that is, and it's not weekly. It's supposed to be weekly, and you really can't do much less. but it's like, hey, here's what I've been up to this week. And it's like on Ask the Podcast Coach, we talked about reviews and negative reviews, link.
Mhm.
On School of Podcasting, I talked about blah, 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 link. On Podcast Radio Show, I gave a thumbs down to this show. Find out why, click here. It's literally just 2 sentences and a link of everything I've been up to. And then it's like this, if I put one out this week, it'd be like, hey, I listened to Dave Grohl's audiobook on Audible. He's the drummer from Nirvana, the lead singer of the Foo Fighters. It's an amazing book, and it's almost like a master class in storytelling. It really is. And that's it. I mean, it's literally just like 3 sentences, and at the end, it's like, hey, buy me a coffee or join the School of Podcasting. See you bye. It's super.
Yeah.
I get these people that have basically taken their podcast and transcribed it and then turned it into a newsletter. And I'm like, if I had one podcast, yes, I would do that. But I have that and a job. And I'm like, So,
Well,
yeah.
And I used to, so I follow Paul Thurrott. He is on with Leo Laporte on Windows
Yeah.
Weekly. And I followed him before he was even on Windows Weekly. So, he used to put out a weekly newsletter, and he'd write about his family and
Yeah.
some things that were going on in the Windows world and some of those kinds of things. And I found it very interesting, but I am so bored by my own writing. Like, I don't even want to write it. I mean, you're like, so I've been thinking or trying to ideate around, like, what do people actually want from me? Like, what would they be interested in? What do they do? Well, it's the podcast. So then that's what I love to do. So I'm thinking, like, why all of a sudden would I start writing newsletters? I'm a terrible writer. If that's one. I have seen a lot of ads for this Jarvis, where it'll take some information and write ad copy for you.
Yeah.
Maybe I should give that a try. I don't know, Dave. I think sometimes we just try too hard, and then we do it for a short period. Okay, I'm not talking about other people. I'm going to talk about me for a second. And then I try it for a couple months and I get bored by it, or I'm like, that's too much work. Like, I don't really want to do this. I'm not having fun with it. So then I quit.
Yeah, I always have a thing, if you have any questions, click here. I'd be happy to answer them, kind of thing. And, if it's one of those things like a new podcaster, right, that quits at episode 7, if you're not really getting a ton of feedback, or if you don't see any huge return on investment, and you're not, because you just launched it. So you're like, I like talking into a microphone. So I get that. So.
Yeah. Well, this is what I like the best. I like hanging out with you or whoever else. I like a chat room. I like the live aspect of it. I don't want to do a bunch of writing or harvesting emails or those kinds of things. So it's just, I think you have to kind of think through, like, what do I like to do and how do I want to do this?
Yeah, Daniel is the king of Jarvis. He can definitely give you some tips.
I keep seeing it on Facebook, and I'm like, really? Can it really do that? So
it's pretty slick.
I know, but
I use
but
it.
then again, okay. So even though someone writes, say I had someone writing ad copy for me, am I really going to be that engaged with it? You're like, I don't. I had a guest 2 weeks ago on Home Gadget Geeks, Erin Lawrence, and she does a lot of YouTube work and a lot of reviews and in the tech space, and she's really, really good. And so I had her on. She does a better job tweeting about my podcast than I do. Like, it's almost like she's just better at it, right? It's because she's good at it, and I'm not. I am not good at those things. I'm not good at advertising on Twitter. So,
yeah. I said to Daniel, I'm like, is that going to be a new course? That's a strategy I've tried twice, and it works. It's not retirement money, but if you make a free course on a product that has an affiliate program, you just, at the end of every video, like, hey, if you decide to buy this, can you please use this link? And I've had people do that with Podpage. So Ken is asking, what do you forecast is going to happen with podcasting in 2022?
Oh, we're there already?
I'm going to say, are we doing predictions already? The thing I think it's interesting, the latest one is there's a show on Gimlet called like The Headliner or something like that. And it's super popular, apparently. And it's so popular that Spotify, who owns Gimlet, said, yeah, we're going to make that one exclusive. And I was like, ooh, how would I feel if, somebody that's not me said, oh, yeah, your show. Yeah, we're going to make it harder to get. and we're going to put it on this platform that is not really podcast friendly. I try to listen to podcasts on Spotify. It's just not, if you're used to other things. I was listening to James Cridland this morning, and he said something about how he listened on Google Podcasts. He goes, he doesn't have it in such and such. He goes, because Google Podcast made its own app. He goes, hint, hint, Spotify. And they should make their own podcast app if they want people to really, really get in on that. But so I'll be interested to see how much more of that like walled garden stuff goes on. I mean, it's going to grow. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, well, let's see. It's grown every year since 2005. My guess is it's going to continue growing, especially in places like Brazil and other parts of the country. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah. When do you think the growth stops? I mean, it's got to stop at some point. I mean, where do you think, when and where do you think it stops?
Because we're up to like, I know we're over 50% of people
Yeah.
are now, I'd have to go look at our monthly stats from Edison Research. I would think around, that's funny. That's a good one. Because it's the older people that aren't going to be listening. So you have to figure out what percentage of the people are like 80 and above, and then kind of go that route.
I think that's a more interesting stat. Like, when do we reach market saturation and it stops growing? Because it always does. At some point it will.
Right.
So what is that number? And I don't think, by the way, I don't think it's going to happen in 2022.
Right.
I'm just kind of thinking like, okay, where are we? And it will slow down as we get to that point, whatever it is, it'll start to slow down. We've seen some really nice 3 or 4% growth over the last 10 years. It'll start to really slow down as it gets closer to that number. It's, it's kind of like mass reaching the speed of light. So you just don't, I don't know. I actually think we'll in 2022 will be a little flat to growth. I think I coming out of COVID, so to speak, or getting through these COVID years, I just don't I don't see the momentum continuing, and I don't see anything to push that momentum in 2022. All these conferences have stumbled. Everybody's trying to get back on their feet with some of the things we did before. And of course, I think there'll still continue to be consolidation. It's way too wide for the trend. All the other things like this get wide, and then they consolidate down to just a handful, and everybody else kind of gets out of the business. So I think we may see some consolidation in 2022 again.
Yeah, Kyle says, I think the growth stops when Apple weeds out all the dead shows and restarts the counter with only live shows. That would be great. Don't know if they're going to do that, but that would be awesome.
God, what a nightmare that would be.
And then Craig says there's plenty of growth outside the U.S. Craig had another question.
There's room. The question is, will it?
Right.
Like, sure, there's plenty of people, but not just because the world does not always do what the United States does. And just because we have market penetration of, say it's 70% in the United States, that doesn't mean the rest of the world's going to follow with those same numbers. Right. I mean, Africa, as an example, they'll probably never get to the place the United States is from a penetration standpoint, just because of the market conditions that are there. And so I'd be a little cautious in looking at thinking like, let's take the United States, let's see where it's gone today, then let's multiply that out through the rest of the world. I don't know, Craig. I don't know if it works that way. I think there's going to be some spots in the world that never really catches up or goes as far as it does here in the U.S.
JD says Spotify is going to continue to take a larger slice of the listener base. Here's my thought on that, because I really don't care. And here's why. I didn't care when Netflix beat Blockbuster. I don't care where the movie came from. I just wanted to watch the movie. So now, and I threw that out once, and James Cridland like, yeah, but that's a big story, because at one point Apple had 80% of the market, and I go, yep. And at one point Apple quit caring about how much of their, they didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And of course they lost their share. The Apple Podcast app is not great.
But I see your point, Dave. It's like, who cares? At some point,
I don't care where they're coming from,
right.
As long as my numbers go up or whatever
you can be there.
Yeah,
right. And you can be there. That's key. Like, it matters if you can't be in Spotify.
Yeah, and if it's as long as Spotify isn't putting a bunch of ads in front of my show that I get 0% on, and as long as they're yeah, that's the problem is when they own the market and then go, oh, by the way, now that we own the market, suckers, and then they do a bunch of stuff, and
No, they would never do that. Come on. That's
come
never
on.
happened
I mean,
before.
they've worked with musicians; they won't screw anybody. So
No,
yeah,
yes. Yeah, Taylor Swift.
yeah. How do you push podcasting to the work from home audience as community to work drops off? Commuting to work.
Commuting to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you push podcasting?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
That is a good question. How do you restructure it? Remember before the pandemic, we would always say, 20-minute commute, the average
Right.
commute time's 20 minutes. So kind of blah, blah, blah. That's all, that's all effed up at this point. Like
It really is.
I went in one time this week. And so I really had I had to listen to my podcast. I had time to listen to 3/4 of a single podcast that I would normally listen to 7 of in a week, right? Because I just wasn't in the car. And I haven't made that change over to listening to those here. You know what I'm doing though? I'm watching a lot more YouTube. So maybe some of those, maybe we need to find ways to be more on YouTube if folks are watching. Because I'll watch YouTube. I'll put a YouTube video on and watch it at home. I won't put a podcast on. Listen, it's so stupid, Dave. Like I could just be playing podcasts on my PC and listening to them while I work. No, I go to YouTube for that because I'm here. Like YouTube is here. Just a weird thing.
And not that it was hard, but when I finally added YouTube to my Fire TV, my Amazon Fire TV in my living room, and I could watch YouTube on my TV, there was a while there I watched nothing but YouTube for about a week. You need to go in, like, look at my subscriptions. Oh, look, Pat Flynn has a new video out and things like that. So, Kyle, you get the official jingle.
Ooh, now that's a good question.
So that was a good question.
Is that new?
That is, I use that on the School of Podcasting. That's the one and only Wayne Henderson. And on occasion, somebody, especially if I get somebody, if I'm interviewing somebody and I ask them and they go, ooh, that's a good question. I'll be like, oh, hold on.
Ooh, now that's a good question.
So, Ken's like, I thought I'd prime the pump with that question. Steven says an easy, accessible way to listen to podcasts can increase podcast listenership. Is it really that hard? That's my question on that. There's a podcast which put a podcast behind a phone number, a radio station playing nothing but podcasts. That's been tried 3 times, by the way, where you get a phone number. And I was like, does somebody really want to listen to your podcast like this? Like, and the people that are named Irene. And, so.
Well, I don't even listen. I don't even know my kids' phone numbers. I'm going to remember a podcast phone number.
Yeah. Plus, you're going to use your minutes. Not that matters anymore.
No, that doesn't. That doesn't.
Yeah.
Matter. It's an interesting thought, though.
Yeah. Kyle says it's time to learn Spanish. I'm using Duolingo, but boy, man, they're persistent. Like I had like a 3-day streak going, and then I missed, and they're like, "You blew your streak, man. Get back on the horse." I was like, "All right." So, but I can't say anything yet. But I understand woman and man and boy. I think I can say I will eat the chair. I think is probably in there. But yeah, Korean and Sweden are big in podcasting. All the countries that never were into podcasting are going to slowly start getting into it. Gary is on the social audio train. Will help drive podcasting. Could be. I have not heard a lot about. We have Rich is in Clubhouse right now, but now granted, again, I will. I always say I make that. I'm lucky if I make that group a week ahead of time. Today I made it about an hour ahead of time, and I don't promote it. So that's why there's nobody in Clubhouse. But we used to, when I first started using Clubhouse, and I did the same amount of promotion, we'd have 8 people in there. So it's just not as many people in there.
It's what's interesting, I think, is when we think about audio in podcasts, TikTok does more, just TikTok does more views in a day than I think every single podcast that might be listened to. So now, will that last forever? Probably not. But I just don't know if it's going to be a medium. That's that will continue to grow and be as big. I think we have way too big of expectations for it sometimes. Like we think it's going to be it's going to be these numbers that we see on Facebook or Google or whatever.
Right.
And I think you got to we still have to continue to work hard at it and meet people where they're at. And there's going to be a few, like everything, there's going to be a few who do really well with it. And the rest of us are just going to kind of be average, or below average. And it's just, I think that's just the way I don't want to, man, does that sound like Debbie Downer? But,
Well, it's and I always point at, let's look at authors, let's look at musicians. A lot of people doing it. Not everybody successful. Just because you're doing it,
I listened to Bill Burr's I think I mentioned this the other
Yeah.
day. I listened to Bill Burr's podcast. It's terrible. Like
Is
he's
it?
a funny comedian. He is awful on his podcast. Now he gets good numbers to it, allegedly, but you're like, yeah, yikes.
I'll have to listen because I've heard a lot about it. And
He was yawning, Dave. I was listening to it with Ed. Ed and I were
Yeah.
sick of talking to each other when I was out there. And Ed's like, let's listen to a podcast. So we listened to Bill Burr. He is literally yawning through his advertisements. And he keeps apologizing. He's like, I don't know why I'm so tired. It's like, seriously, Bill? Like you can't get up for your own podcast, dude? Hell.
Well, speaking of advertising, Craig says advertising is picking up here in Spain.
Yeah.
Larger brands are spending money here on podcast ads, except on our show. I think you're going to see a lot. That's something I think you're going to see happening in 2022 is podcasters are going to start advertising on other podcasts. I think that's going to be a strategy that picks way up, especially with the whole Spotify ad thing. Jacking around says, when will these platforms offer video and audio, especially with YouTube's recent job hunt? That's a good question. Rob at podcast411.com has a post on how many apps do video. Some will just play the audio, but they won't play the video. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I can wash the dishes and vacuum while listening to a podcast. But if it's a video and I have to watch it, I can't watch and wash dishes at the same time. So
yeah, I still put it on, and I'll put it somewhere, where I can kind of see it. And I don't, the stuff I watch on YouTube, I don't always have to be watching, even though it's very watchable stuff.
Yeah. It says it was only a few months ago. People were worried about Clubhouse taking podcasts over. Yeah, that's, and what did I say about that? I said, yeah, not going to happen. Not to say it's going to go away, but I'm with you, Jim. I think you were the one that said they were positioning themselves to get bought.
Oh, for sure.
And since the fact that they haven't been bought, now they're kind of like, now what do we do? And I noticed today when I fired it up, it's like, hey, you can make 30-second clips now. And I'm like, I'll give them credit. Their developers are constantly adding things to this. But if you look back when they started, they had the whole, you had to have an invite to get in. So everybody had the fear of missing out, and it was new. It was like, oh, well, and actually it wasn't new. It was called radio before, but it was radio on your phone, and there's so much buzz about that thing. But as soon as like 4 other ones came out, it was like, oh, well, I don't need to get into yours. I can go over here on, whatever Fireside or Twitter.
Well, the other ones are dead. The other ones are dead. I mean, if you think Clubhouse is dead, go to any of the other sites that were doing this. And listen, I know I just offended 5 of you because you use those sites. They're not dead. I'm out there all the time. They're dead. Let's just say.
See, Gary says Twitter Spaces is heating up.
Whatever.
No, we'll see, right?
No.
Yeah.
Well, maybe. This. Yeah. If you want to watch Clubhouse and see when they're going to get sold, just wait for the next time their big ad round to get new users. Right. That is always StreamYard did this right before they sold.
Right.
Is they offered that $10 plan, and that $10 plan brought a bunch of people in, and then they sold. So if you want to see when Clubhouse is getting sold, none of those other sites are doing very well. They're just, it's just not, I don't know. It's just not a form of media that's designed. It's radio. I don't know. All right.
Yeah.
Here's the deal. I had breakfast this morning. This is the problem. I haven't had breakfast in 2 months, and I had breakfast. I'm all wound up, Dave. I am all wound up.
JD says, I've been working from home for almost 2 years now. My commute is now 10 seconds as opposed to an hour. So I've lost that listening time. But yeah, I walk at 10:30. I walk around the block and I walk at 3:30, and then I do some walking on my lunch. So that's when I listen to podcasts now, but that's like 7 minutes. And then I've been trying to read more. That's one thing that we forget about. There are other forms of competition.
What is this reading thing that you speak of?
It's there's this thing
Like
called a
paper?
no, a
And-
Kindle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but on a Kindle, because here's what I have found: I don't always get something out of a podcast, but I almost always get something out of a book. And because they're they're well thought out, they're that like I said, the here let's do an experiment. Rich, I don't think you're going to be able to hear this on Clubhouse, and then we'll wrap things up. I'm going to pull up, this is illegal, by the way, for anybody wondering at home. I'm going to pull up Dave Grohl's book, and we're going to go and I'm going to pick a chapter and listen to how he sets this up. Like his whole thing is like, it's just well crafted stories. So yeah, this will be fun.
Sure, I want to be your dog.
Oh, hold on.
Toronto, Canada, June
Let me speed him down a bit. Everybody's like, wow, Dave's on coke.
22nd, 1990. A sunny afternoon in the 6, Scream had just set sail on yet another North American tour in our trusted but funky Dodge van. Beginning with a jump over the border for a short run of Canadian shows in 2 of my favorite cities on earth, Montreal and Toronto.
Are you breaking any rules by doing this?
Yes, I am. That's
Okay,
completely
all right,
legal.
all right.
So let's just say I stop there. Would you want to hear the rest of that? Like he's on tour, he's in Canada, he's in the band Scream.
No, I was too worried you were breaking
No.
rules.
No, I'm breaking a rule. So
Uh,
but most of his stuff starts off with like, if you were to listen probably another 30 seconds, and I was like, I was hoping it was going to do that sooner. Where you go, oh, I want to hear the rest of that.
yeah.
Like the one he said, I'm woken up by the phone and it's my bass player saying, hey, you want to come swim in the pool at the Mansion house, or the Manson house, as in Charlie Manson house? And he's like, yeah. He goes, what could happen there? So everything is like an adventure.
Yeah.
And he's also super vulnerable. But it's called Storyteller by Dave Grohl. If you're a fan of the Foo Fighters or Nirvana, definitely check it out. But it's more than just, it also gives you really insights into fame, because he talks about how when he was in Nirvana, they were playing these little clubs, the album comes out, and all of a sudden the little clubs have more people outside than inside because they can't, and they started getting bigger venues, and they were still like, there's not enough room for these people. And he goes, and we went from selling CDs out of the back of our van to selling 300,000 copies a week. And he goes, and then it dawns on you, we can't turn this off. Like it's out of the bag.
Mhm.
And it's, so that was some really interesting insight. So,
Mhm.
but there are a lot
They're-
of really good stories.
They're gonna pull that cover. Nirvana's gonna pull that cover. The the baby and the
Oh, really?
yeah. I think
Because
they're
it
gonna
was
pull it
Willie.
and replace it. Yeah, that's what I heard.
That's sad. I'm so tired of just everybody
Cancel.
getting yeah,
Getting
that's it.
canceled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh well.
Ooh, okay, lesson learned. Don't eat breakfast before Ask the Podcast Coach. Holy cow. Well, and we ate at Perkins, so I had I had like
Well, you need a
big-
nap.
No, I'm all wound up. I had the big country, so I had a bacon and sausage and potatoes. I think gravy was on that with eggs, and then I had the pancakes too. I am flying at this point. So I apologize for those of you if I offended you in some way or said something. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. Just a little wound up, just a little cranky this morning. I thought I'd be in a better mood. Although, and I feel like I could go another half an hour, but our time is done.
Yeah. So
Thanks for letting me be late. Thanks for covering. for
Oh
me.
well, it's like,
I
all right,
appreciate
well we'll do this, and hopefully I'm hoping as I listen back to this, because I was like, okay, I'll look at somebody's website. I just need to remember to describe what I'm looking at, because I'm like, it is an audio podcast.
Mhm.
So I think I did a good job of that. So
Good. Well, I tuned in. I tuned in when I could to just
yeah.
hear. Sarah was with me when we were driving, and she was laughing at something you said. So, you did the old man voice, and she thinks that's super funny. And
The old man. Yeah.
yeah, you did it well too. And she's just cracking up, so she appreciated it. So we'll see you guys. We'll see you guys next week.
All right. We'll see
All
you.
right,
Take
take
care.
care.
Bye bye.